Elizabeth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. You've written a great book, Forget the Camel, the Madcap World of Animal Festivals and What They Say About Being Human. You say in the preface that you never expected to have this one experience. I'll tell you, I years ago, I got into, as a pretty grown man, playing World of Warcraft. And I was really, really into it for a little while, and not an exceedingly long season, but long enough. And I was trying to solve this one quest, and you can ask for other players for help. And this is back when they had Skype headsets and stuff. And this player said, "Well, wait, let's just do audio chat, and I'll help you." And it's this really high pitched voice, and it's like a 14-year-old kid. And he's like, "Mom, shut up! I told you I'm gaming right now. I'm helping somebody solve a quest." And I thought that's where I took a long, hard look. And I said, what am I doing? You say that you never expected to live stream a woolly worm race. But you say, here I am, glued to the computer screen looking at seven strangers at cut black and brown woolly worms tenderly in their hands. You're watching these people and the worms, and one's making its way. Do you have several moments? I mean, are there some moments writing this book about animal festivals where you're like, wow, I really have to take stock, and I can't believe I'm watching worms race?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this book was really fun to research, and because part of that fun was that you never knew what was coming. You sort of never knew kind of like exactly what you'd see. I think animal festivals are a really broad topic in some ways. Like it's really niche and narrow in many ways, but I think, it also covers so many different types of events that I saw, like tons of different types of events about different types of animals and different communities hosting them. And so it was like a really fun and I think really engaging type of research to do, because you never sort of knew exactly what you were going to see.
You went to Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, for Groundhog Day.
I have been there for this. I went in college, and we drove all night.
Wow.
Got there. We picked up somebody in State College. We got there in the middle of the night. I remember that. It was so cold.
So cold.
And I just remember wanting to go near the fire to get warm, and then it felt like my jacket and my pants were going to melt off. And then when I got 20 feet away from the fire, it was horrible. It was freezing. And then you do it all to watch these guys in top hats, and then it's over
by 7 a.m.
Is this the most anticlimactic thing of your life? Like, it's all the buildup, right? I mean, to the thing, yeah. Right? Did you experience it that way?
Totally. I think that anticlimactic is definitely one word for it. I think but the buildup is what it is. Like the buildup is what it's all about, I think, in some ways more than the actual prediction, and, sort of like an excuse for a party, if you will. And I think that the anticlimactic nature of it is almost beside the point. And I think there's like a little fair in town afterwards, and people definitely like hang out all day and make a day of it. But yeah, the real action is pre-dawn for sure.
Did you see the movie?
Yeah, I did.
It's so interesting. That movie, I think, is so deep and so existential. And Harold Ramis in the director's cut says that every religious tradition, every philosophical school wrote him and said, "You've got us. This is exactly what our tradition teaches us," right? And it's this kind of mirror in some ways, right? That film. I look at your book that way, as a mirror. I didn't know what to expect when I got it, and I'm an animal lover, so I was excited to read it, but it's really so anthropologically anchored, and I mean that in the best sense. It's really a wonderful picture of the human condition. You say in the book, festivals are unique performances of local identity that exist at the crossroads of our symbolic and practical lives. Their purpose is twofold, looking both inward and outward at once. And then you say a couple pages later, the festivals tell stories about animals, which ultimately are also stories about us. You were telling a story about yourself and your family, right? You kind of picked up your grandmother's raison d'être, right? Her work as an anthropologist. She had this great unfinished project
Yeah. So my
of
grandmother,
studying these festivals.
yeah, she was. So my grandmother was an anthropologist who studied human animal relationships, and she was a real pioneer in the field. She wrote a lot. She was very sort of interested and involved in the American West. So she wrote about the rodeo and she wrote about things like that. And right before she died, she was starting to work on what would have been sort of like an anthology of animal festivals around the world. So, she had sort of files and articles and printouts and things just like jammed in file folders. And then she passed away, unfortunately, in before she could finish the book. And that I was 9 when she passed away. So I had grown up sort of hearing about her doing the travel for this project and starting to think about it. And then, of course, my whole life after she died, I knew that this project was unfinished. And so it was a real exciting opportunity to sort of look at what she had worked on, try to like decipher her notes and her sort of clippings and her ideas from what was left. And I think very quickly realized that I would never write the exact book she was going to write, of course. Like I couldn't finish her project exactly. But what I could do is write my own project, sort of using this idea. And I used a lot of her notes throughout the book as sort of touchstones. And I think I hope it gives the book a little bit of like a kind of a broader research base, because it was not just me and my notes and my experiences at these festivals in 2022 to 2024. It was also notes and experiences and interviews and that sort of thing from when my grandmother was doing this in the 80s and 90s. And so it gives it like I think sometimes the similarities are really worth noting. And I note them at various points in the book where like nothing had changed in the last 30 years. And then at other times, I think the differences are really interesting. So like, I think in general, there's much more of a concern about welfare at all these events now that I witnessed versus when my grandmother went long ago. So it kind of gave like a little bit of a multi-generational sort of grounding to the research itself, which made it really fun to write. And I think it was personally really fulfilling. I think I got to sort of know how my grandmother was thinking about things more and more. But it was also, I think it added a good layer to the book itself, because I think the book in many ways is wrestling with what do we do with the past? So, okay, we've done something for 50 years, 100 years. Is that still right? Is that justification enough to keep doing it? Like that's one of the key questions of the book. And so adding my own layer in of like, how am I relating with my past? I think sort of like offered, I hope, sort of like a good mirror to sort of what I was talking about in the abstract sense about festivals.
Yeah, one thing, and I might want to come back to this as we talk about some stuff you write later in the book about the Scopes trial, but it is the looming question I think that hangs over the book is the question of is and ought, right? Just because something is, ought it be, right? That we can imagine things differently. I mean, although sometimes we can't, right? This is why therapists and historians and many people have jobs, right? Because it's just not easy to do, right? But it is a question. I'm curious. So I was at an event Monday at the Constitution Center, and it was about the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution and stuff. And one of the things that came up was originalism. And you're a lawyer, Harvard trained. This is fantastic, wonderful trade school up in Cambridge. I and one of the things that came up, it was this idea that we don't put historians on the court, we put lawyers on the court, right? So like it's the challenge of originalism is lawyers are trained really different than historians.
I'll say.
I'm wondering what was it like to inherit? I mean, you're a lawyer, not an anthropologist, right? So what was it like? I mean, what challenges are there? How is it to wade into a field that you're not really trained in? Your mind has been patterned, at least in adult academic formation, very differently. I mean, how was that? What were some of it? Was it challenging?
In many ways, it was very challenging. So this is something that I thought about a lot, really actively while I was writing it, because I didn't want to do something irresponsible, right? Like to write about people in a way that wasn't sort of grounded either in reality or in my own experiences or in like really good research. I wanted to be really thoughtful about how I was talking about other people and their communities and their sort of traditions. I think as a so when I was in college, I studied religion. And so I was a big humanities person my whole life. And through my religion studies, I took a few classes on sort of like, the anthropology of religion or ethnography, or sort of like dabbled in that world a little bit. I certainly like was not my expertise. I did not do that methodology for, my thesis work or anything like that. But I had a passing awareness. So I think like in terms of understanding the ethics of what it is to talk to someone and interview them and that sort of thing, I had a sense. And then I think it was also partly like the fun of it. I think when I went to law school, I really got entrenched in that kind of legal way of thinking and reading and writing. And I think there's lots of good things to be said about that. I think it's a really formulaic kind of like, maybe not formulaic, but like there's a lot of rules to that type of writing and thinking. And I think, one obvious example is that when you write for like a law review article, or even in a case, like I worked for judges for a few years. So when you're writing something for a judge and you're citing different cases, you need a citation for almost every sentence. Like you never want to be going out on a limb and saying something just because you think it. Like that's not a good enough reason in the law, and nor should it be. Like I think there's good reasons for those like discipline-based citations. But when I started writing this book, it was sort of fun to just like remember how to write what I thought, like have paragraphs with no citations, because it was something that I experienced that I have thoughts about. And that was sort of justification enough to put it down on the page. And so I think it was both, I think, to your question, it was both a real sense of humility about what I was trying to undertake and how little I knew and how sort of untrained I was in some ways. But on the other hand, I found it very freeing to be able to think as I wrote. I think I was raised and in all my, pre-law school taught that writing is thinking, like thinking is writing and writing is thinking, like those two things are the same, and really got to kind of tap back into that in this project.
One of my best friends from college became a Presbyterian minister, and he got stationed. It took a call, as they would say, in Alaska. And he called me one day and he says, "You know what I'm doing? I'm about to bless a dog sled, the Iditarod, dude." He's like, "You don't know what the hell that is down in the lower 48." And I didn't. I mean, I knew the term, I guess, but I just had no idea. Like many things about Alaska that he acquainted me with in his pastoral travels. You write about the Iditarod, and it's fascinating. There are so many, like the rest of the book, you point out so many contradictions and conflicts in the way we think about animals and our festivals. But one thing that you point out that struck me is, and you make this passing reference to Alaska's anti-cruelty, animal cruelty laws, and they're very explicit and very humane and sane. And we would all look, yeah, I think most good-natured humans would look at them and say, yeah, of course. And then you say, but there's this thing, except for dog races. None of this, I mean, this is just so glaring, right? I mean, these did these kind of glaring contradictions after a while just existentially exhaust you as you wrote this book? Because you chronicle them like almost on every other page.
I mean, that's a very great question. It's something that, as someone who pays attention to animal issues, I face all the time, like not just in writing this book. I think how our society treats animals is completely nonsensical. And like, I think it's sort of like there's a lot of contradictions and dissonances sort of embedded in how we treat animals in society kind of more broadly. And so yes, is my short answer to your question. Of course, while writing this, I found myself really struggling with, witnessing violence and struggling with then talking to the people who were perpetrating that violence. And they were really, seemed to be really nice, kind people who were welcoming me to their town. And I think, those types of contradictions can be really hard. You sort of like, you are faced with a really hard set of questions about that, sort of how both can be true at the same time. But I think it's one of the reasons that I found writing this book about animal festivals to be so meaningful, and so like why I thought so strongly that it had to be written is because I think festivals are actually kind of like a safe place to talk about animals in some ways, because most people, unless you happen to be from one of these communities, don't have a lot of preconceived notions about these festivals. Like if I mentioned the jumping frog contest of Calaveras County, like most people have never heard of that. And so because of that, we can have a conversation about what goes on there. You can like read what I wrote with a relatively open mind and sort of shape your own ideas about something pretty new. Whereas, there's lots written out there about like animal agriculture, animal testing, like much like heavier hitting areas of animal rights and animal welfare discourse. But I think people come to those with a lot of preconceived kind of ideas and notions and defensiveness and, inconsistencies and hypocrisies. And like, we all have all this kind of gunk in our brain already about that stuff. So writing about festivals in some ways, I wanted to try to step away from that. And it's why I didn't include some really big festivals like the rodeo or the Kentucky Derby. Like I would consider those animal festivals, but I didn't include them because I think there's almost like too much junk in people's heads about them. I sort of wanted to do something where people felt safe to engage the conversation.
Is this kind of the distance between description and prescription, right? I mean, when you prescribe, people just are defensive, right? Don't tread on me. Don't tell me. You say don't walk on the grass. I want to walk on the grass, and I'm relatively law abiding, but I just, whereas thick description, often the truth kind of sneaks up on you, and it's one of the things that's beautiful about the book. You do offer some moral insights, but they're sort of subtly offered in oftentimes questions. You don't make a lot of hard prescriptions. You ask a lot of probing questions. Was that intentional? When was that going into it? You're like, hey, I'm gonna describe more than prescribe in this work.
I think partly it was my part related to my answer I gave before about sort of anthropology. As part of it is my sensitivity to sort of saying something prescriptive about communities that put on events that are kind of rooted in local tradition that is not mine. And so some of it is just my own humility about engaging in that conversation and understanding that there's more layers to that than I can really dig through even after years of research. And then the other piece I think is I think that describing to people sort of what's going on with animals, and hoping that raises some sort of questions about the inconsistencies or broader thinking about animals, I think was definitely part of the mission of the book. I think we often, and this is part of why the title of the book is what it is, we often just really forget about animals. Like we don't think twice about so much that we do to animals in society. And I think I am always asking people in my writing and in my thinking and in my advocacy to basically like remember the animals, like bring them back up into conversation, start paying attention to them, start paying attention to how you relate to them. Because I think that was my journey anyway. When I did start paying attention to them, I found that I couldn't really live with a lot of the like inconsistent behavior or the behavior that I was living with that was inconsistent with my values. And I think once you pay attention, that conflict becomes much more clear. Whereas I think lots of people prefer to sort of, not face up with those types of inconsistencies. So the book was trying to be gentle in some ways. But yeah.
Do you have pets?
I do. I have 3. I have a dog and 2 cats.
Okay. So you're close to animals. I mean, they're, do you ever feel conflicted about pets, about domesticating animals that way? I mean, there's zoos, there's pets. How do you feel existentially about having pets?
I feel like I feel like there are so many bigger issues, honestly, and a lot of my sort of I think I understand the question. So right. So I think that should we be?
I have no problem with you having pets.
Yeah.
This is not a gotcha question. I'm just curious how you think about it.
I mean, I think that there's lots of really interesting sort of philosophical questions about whether sort of ownership is the right paradigm to talk about pets, or whether we should, really be kind of engaging in that kind of like almost like, dominion kind of relationship with our animals where we're sort of the sole caretakers, and they, there's lots of moves to shift language to be like, I'm their, their steward through life rather than their owner or whatever. And I think those debates are all really interesting, like happy to have them. But in my mind, there's like so many, like when we start talking about animal issues, like pets, they have the most care, they have the most protection, they have veterinary care, like they are mostly fine. And I think there's so many other animals and so many other animal issues that are harder to get people to pay attention to, things like animal agriculture, things like zoos, things like animal testing, that affect, I mean, billions of animals. And so it's just, to me, it's like a question of scale of the harm almost, that like, sure, maybe it's not quite right to call myself an owner of my dog who's like an autonomous creature with some soul and some spirit, but that like is not kind of where I find the most sort of urgency for work about animals.
When you say steward versus owner, I think of a Democratic pollster that loses the Democrats 3 more election cycles. Like, hey, like liberals are so bad with language, right? Like,
yeah,
conservatives tend to be very good with messaging or branding, and I just say you're right. I mean, priorities, right? I mean, priorities are important. Years ago, I read the book The Lost Dogs. Now, the author's name escapes me. I can't believe that, but it's about the Michael Vick dogs, and the author was a Sports Illustrated columnist who wrote about Vic and the dogs, these abused pit bulls, and then later turned into a book. And I had a pit bull at the time. I was reading it with him at my side a few times, and I just was crying a couple of times. The story is very moving and dramatic and painful and hopeful at the same time. But it's interesting because the author got lots of letters when he wrote the Sports Illustrated piece, and he said that they were asking, well, there's all sorts of animal cruelty. Why focus on this? Why focus? And he thought about a lot about that. He said, what it is that dogs, why does it hit deeper? He said that nothing's been closer to us than dogs. Our evolutionary pattern, there are alarm systems, our companions are so many. He said horses maybe, but you don't cuddle and sleep with your horse. And the dogs, it's just this, it's so, because they're close and they read our soul, when they do studies on how they read emotions, they read it in human ways. Chimps can't do it. Wolves can't do it. Our mutual closest links evolutionarily, but they seem to be uniquely mirroring human intuitions and stuff. I found the Iditarod stuff heartbreaking. Snakes, I'm with Indiana Jones. I hate snakes. All right. Yeah, you included snakes. I mean, something that I'm an animal guy, not sympathetic to, right? Although I will tell you, when you talked about the slaughtering of these snakes, I was troubled, which I was almost surprised that I was troubled, but I did find some compassion for the snakes. Why include you? There's lots of festivals, why snakes? What? Because I think most people find snakes repulsive. Is that the reason to put them in the book?
Partly, yeah. And I think that so the snake festival that I went to is called the Rattlesnake Roundup. I went to the world's largest one in Sweetwater, Texas, where they round up rattlesnakes from the sort of surrounding environment in Texas, and they bring them all into a central sort of arena, and then they behead them at this sort of weekend-long festival called the Roundup. And it's not sort of a quick and painless death. They sort of mess with the snakes, and then they behead them, and they skin them, and they like make handprints with the blood. It's like a very visceral kind of event where they're really engaging with the bodies of these creatures. I thought it was really important to include because I think that there are lots of killing festivals in our country. And I'm using the term killing festival kind of broadly. There's like hunting contests. There's like a true killing festival like this Rattlesnake Roundup. But then I think there's also, dozens and dozens of what we might consider very palatable killing festivals, like the very next chapter I talk about, which is the Maine Lobster Festival, where same thing, they're going out into the wild, rounding up thousands of lobsters, and then killing them by boiling them alive. And just because you don't see it and there's no blood doesn't make that like a comfortable death either. And so part of including rattlesnakes was, again, that I think most of us don't have sort of an inherent compassion for rattlesnakes. We don't have an inherent sort of like defensive reaction when we hear that. And so a lot of people can have that reaction that you had, which is sort of to say like, oh, that doesn't sound quite right. Like something about that isn't right. But then it's like the thought exercise that I wanted to lead readers to is to think, okay, but how is that different than like, a big cookout or a big sort of event where a whole town is gathering around a food that we think of, or an animal that we think of as food, like lobsters. And so some of it is just setting up this paradigm of like dominance can look evil, right? Like it can look mean and sort of like classically dominion based, which I think the Rattlesnake Roundup does. It's very violent. It's very like gory, and that's sort of the point. But dominance can also look like a lot of other things. And I think starting with like the worst of the worst in my mind, sort of like the most obvious example, lets you kind of grow from there. So it's one of the reasons I started the book there, is to just give us a place as a reader to grow from.
Yeah, I mean, you summarize this well. You say if our only like you say why is it permissible to do such things to snakes? The answer might well be it isn't, and we shouldn't. If our only reason is rooted in fear or in a long-standing notion that snakes are dangerous, then we aren't as rational as we claim we are. We don't have to like snakes. I don't particularly, but not like I'm with you on that. But not liking snakes is not reason enough to torture or slaughter them. There's something in that paragraph that I thought about a lot as I was reading the book. You say we aren't as rational as we claim to be. Yeah, we aren't, right? I mean, there's that great line in The Big Chill, I guess, that Jeff Goldblum's character says, you know, we can get through a day without food or without sex, but we can't get through a day without a good rationalization. We're not rational animals, right? We're rationalizing animals. So it doesn't, isn't that, you mentioned this a few times, that we're not as rational or self-aware as we think. But isn't that sort of the nature of the human condition? Isn't what makes reality somewhat palpable self-deception? Because there's so many inconsistencies and incongruencies in life, right? I mean, Mark Twain, who you talk about in the book, says, you know, in heaven there'll be laughter but no humor, because humor is based on the incongruency. And you talk about humor in theories, which is great about humor. But I mean, wouldn't the world be miserable without rationalization if we were as rational as we thought we were?
I think it's, I don't know. I don't know. I think that maybe in the short term, and I think that's again, um, that's something that I wrestled with a lot in writing this book, because I think change is really hard. Like if we all today decided to pick a behavior that we all have that is irrational and fix it, that is hard. That is like hard work. It's hard to put your ego aside like that. It's hard to sort of decide that now is the day that you're going to make this big change. Like all those things is hard. So like in my mind, in my life, I guess the obvious example of when I did this was when I stopped eating meat. So like that was sort of like, that was hard. It was a hard choice because I lost a lot when I made that choice. And I had to sort of grapple with what I had been doing for the rest of my life and what the good people that I loved and cared for all around me were doing. And like, it forces you to have these really hard conversations. So yes, it is like our self-deception definitely saves us from discomfort. But I guess I'm less and less convinced that discomfort is, is really something we should be avoiding at all costs. I think discomfort is what leads us to really self-assess and really sort of interrogate what's going on around us and where we can find better paths forward. Like I think that discomfort is something we should listen to, because it's saying something isn't quite aligned here, something's not quite right, like, and making steps to get it more towards right. Nothing will ever be perfect, but more towards right, I think, to me feels really fulfilling, and sort of I'm grateful every day that I've made some of those choices, and there's still so much work to do and I'm still doing it. But I guess, yeah. So yes, I guess it does. Self-deception is important, but I think it's also a real problem for sort of, especially for animals, when that self-deception isn't victimless. That self-deception has victims. And I think when you start thinking about it like that, it seems a lot less sort of palatable to keep doing it.
Yeah, that's incredibly well said, right? The self at times it's necessary, like self-medication, right? What's the line between recreation, self-medication, and addiction?
Right,
I mean,
right.
these are right. They're all, yeah, it's really complex. There's another great complex moment in the book I loved. You're at the lobster festival, what with your wife, and you they're fundraising, and you're talking about all the complexities of this and the moral problems and all the system and da-da-da. And then you're walking by and they're raising money for this killing fest, and your wife gives money, and you ask her, why'd you donate to the cause? And she's so great, her response, because it felt weird not to. She said they've worked so hard at the clam shake, just like the JC, like they've poured their hearts out, and it's just, and that to me, the nuance and the complexity that you capture there, right? Where she knows what you're doing. I'm sure you guys are morally aligned. I'm sure you're not married because, yeah, we just agree to disagree on animal cruelty. She knows all about, yet she does this. And why did you choose to include that in the book? Because it's a little detail.
It is. And I think it's an important detail, because my wife, like when we did a lot of these trips together, and I think it provided an important sort of that anecdote provided an important reminder, I think, that um these festivals are all run by real people who, as far as I could tell, are all really good people. Like I never came across someone who was like, yeah, I love to abuse animals. Like that's not the story here. The story is really people who really care about their communities, care about their traditions and their cultures and all of that. And they're putting on these events in order to safeguard that, to safeguard their traditions, to safeguard the stories that they were raised on. And I think that there's something really beautiful about that. There's something really lovely about caring so much about your community that you're willing to put so much time and effort into these big, so these events are big. I mean, they host tens of thousands of people, most of them. It takes a lot of organizing and a lot of money and a lot of sort of year-round work to put on some of these bigger events. And I think that, what I didn't want this book to read as was sort of a long animal rights-y rant about how we should just automatically stop using animals in this way, and everyone who does is a bad person. Because I don't think that. I think these issues are a lot more complex. I think the festivals bring so much good to these communities. They raise a lot of money for like civic causes that benefit the communities year round. I think they bring a lot of sort of cultural value to the communities who get to sort of enjoy these stories and remind themselves and their families what's so special about being from this town and not the town over. Like all of those things are good. They really matter, and they make communities stronger and they make people stronger. So I think the book is in many ways wrestling with this really hard moral question of how do you balance harm to animals with benefits to humans? I just think that's a really important, hard question. And I think, like I said at the end of that chapter, I have my answers, but those might look different for other people too. And I think they looked a little different for my wife, who I think is, she's loves animals and she's vegan now with me too. But I think she has a little more sort of like grounding in the human side of things sometimes, which is a healthy influence for me.
I heard this joke. How do you know if someone's a vegan or an atheist? And the punchline was, they tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, do you find that way? I mean, do you find like people that are like lead with their vegan? I find that way among atheists and at least in the American context, some degree in my friends in England a little bit too. But my atheist friends always want to tell you that why they don't believe in God, why they're saying, I'm like, you seem obsessed with God. Like, what do you like? If I didn't believe it, I don't walk around telling people I don't believe in Sasquatch. I swear to God, there is no Sasquatch. I'm just that, But do you find vegans are like that? I mean, is it a little evangelical, the veganism, or do I not meet enough vegans?
I think first of all, everyone's different. I think some people definitely lead with it.
Speak for all vegans, Elizabeth. I want you right now to speak for all vegans. Listeners, pay attention to this part of the podcast. Elizabeth will now speak for the vegans.
I mean, veganism is such a funny thing because what I've noticed in my life and with my friends and my family is that it's not so much always that I raise it. It is that it is raised about me. And like more often than not, that's actually
do you
what
think
happens.
That's because they're offended or they're guilt induced? Like, oh my God. Like, do you feel like that's a reflection of them not being able to just sit on their discomfort and just say, all right, let's talk about it?
I do. I think that's part of it. And I think it's part of that sort of what I was talking about, being forced to face those inconsistencies. Like they can sit there and love their dog and talk about how they just took it to the vet and got it all the vaccines or whatever, and then have chicken on their plate. And they like that kind of dissonance, I think is you have to tell stories about that, right? Like you have to rationalize it. We all know it's dissonant. We all understand that, but like those stories are really weak. And so when someone points out how weak they are just by existing, I think it does raise those types of reactions. But yeah, I will say that I think in my experience, it's more raised about me. Like, it's not like I walk around saying it, but on the other hand, eating communally is a huge part of human culture. Like it just is, like when you catch up with family, friends, whoever, often it's over a meal. And like, because of the way our society is, there's often very few vegan options when you go out. And if you cook at home, you have to kind of explain that. So it does just sort of come up a lot because we eat all the time. Most of us eat 3 or 4 times a day. And like often that's with other people. And so it is one of those things that it kind of is in your face, whether you want to or not. Like, because if I sit there and don't have meat on my plate, that just becomes a topic of conversation almost always.
This is why I think first dates meals are bad options. It could be too much intimacy, right? Like, because there's like, if you meet for coffee or drinks or something, it's easily abortive, right? You can just quickly finish and say, but a meal is bonding, right? And who wants to bond when things are going awkward, right? There's just kind of disjuncture there, right?
Yeah, but it can really raise some good questions. My first date with my wife, we got bagels and I got hummus on mine because I'm vegan. And my wife, she asked, she was like, that's a weird thing to get on a bagel. Why? And And we talked about it, and it sort of opened some really good conversations that like actually are really kind of critical to who I am as a person and how I think about the world. So it's I think those conversations are good. I don't shy away from them. I've been on I've had a long journey with how I respond to them. I think when I was younger in my veganism would often respond in a way that was trying to kind of minimize it and make other people comfortable. And now I'm much more comfortable. I don't say like, how awful are you that you're not vegan? But I'll answer questions honestly. I'll sort of talk about why this is important to me. And I think that, those responses look different for everyone.
Veganism is the kind of worldview or way of being in the world I think I respect the most and don't act on. I think about my commitments. I think, if I really was consistent, I probably would do this. But, we tell ourselves stories to
And it's
justify.
hard. It's really hard. I think that a lot of vegans do a disservice to veganism by talking about it as if it's so easy. And like now I've been vegan only about 5 years. And so now it seems really like self-evident and I have all my routines and like now it's easy, but it was not easy those first 2 years. Like I slipped up all the time. I mean,
It'd be easier becoming an Orthodox Jew and keeping kosher.
Totally.
Way easier.
Because at least there's clear rules. Like I think with veganism too, like there's so much sort of like, is this allowed? Is this like, what about oysters? What about, like you can sort of go down these rabbit holes. And I think that for me, just sort of taking some of the pressure off the word, like I actually didn't call myself vegan for almost the first 2 years I was vegan because like that word added too much kind of almost like political valence on top of what I was doing that I didn't necessarily want to invoke. And so would just sort of, just make choices meal by meal that felt good to me. It just sort of that taking that pressure off helped. But I think, it's a really complicated issue and food is so personal. People have so many kind of like, personal health based, but also kind of cultural, familial based sometimes spiritual based reasons for why they eat what they eat, that it's like, I'm not trying to be prescriptive here, back to that prescriptive descriptive question, but it is sort of, veganism is really important to me personally. And it's part of how I kind of like do my animal work and think about animals.
I'm curious, you in the ellipsis in the opening of the book, you quote Joan Didion, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." What stories are you telling yourself right now that are keeping you alive?
That's a great question. I mean, I think our human condition is one of stories in some ways. So I think there's like tons of them. Like, I mean, I could be here all day telling you the stories that I think that sort of sustain who I am. And some of them are really foundational. Like, I grew up Christian. So some of that, like some stories that are really important to me are based in that tradition.
Do you self-identify as a Christian still?
Yeah, I do. My mom's a minister. My grandfather was a minister. It's like kind of a big part of my upbringing and sort of who I am now. I don't go to church super regularly anymore, but I do like those. Like I said, those stories and those traditions.
That's like most Christians.
Exactly.
Stop going to church.
Exactly. So some of those stories are really important to me. I think there's stories I'm currently thinking about a lot and telling, sort of working my way through a lot about social change, like how can we change people's minds, like those. And I think there's tons of stories that answer that question. So I'm like sort of thinking through a lot of those. And I think like the biggest story that I've reshifted in my life over the last 5-6 years is that animals are really worth our time and attention. Like that this is really something that matters. And it matters to us individually. It matters for our health and our sort of moral and spiritual health and physical health, but it also matters to us kind of like as a species, like sort of to really grapple with what we are doing as a species is kind of like unthinkable. Like once you really kind of zoom out and think about like the moral and psychological and spiritual health of our species, like that is really, I think, weighty and really problematic when you really kind of open your eyes to all of this stuff. So I guess my biggest story is that animals matter. And I believe that. I tell myself that story every day.
There's a great quote in Marilyn Robinson's Gilead. The main character says, I think because I think it brought it to mind when you said that about animals. The character says, "This is an interesting planet. It deserves all the attention you can give it," right? And you could put animals there, right? Is at the heart of that, right? These animals, and I found that as I was reading in certain parts, like especially the snake part, I think it challenged me. And I thought, because I thought about this quote when I was reading it, I thought these snakes deserve this attention that the book is pulling out of me. So thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
appreciate it.
was you say in the book, you're talking about the frog festival in California, and this Mark Twain and the jumping frog story and everything. And you have this sentence I love. You say these two sentences. You say the frogs captured and brought into Frogtown are undeniably pawns for our human ritual. The Jubilee treats frogs with a combination of respect and deep ambivalence. And I wrote in just like much of life, especially religion. I thought about that as the decline of American religion, although some studies are saying that's abating a little bit, but this thing where it's you respected and yet there's shot through with ambivalence and so much of life, right? This is the relationship, right? There's something that we respect and yet are utterly ambivalent about. Thank you. I mean, that's just such an utterly brilliant descriptor of so much of reality, right? And seems like you're experiencing this all the time in this journey at these festivals, right? It seems like you have this respect for the people and for human community and the families and some of the beauty you see, and yet also on a good day ambivalence, right? There's so much existentially torturing, right, to write a book like this, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it was really hard, and it really, some festivals like the Rattlesnake Roundup and the Iditarod, really weighed on me. Like I sort of, it felt kind of icky almost to just like to sort of like have paid my dollars to go and to have like participated by having another body being there, making it look more successful. Like I really kind of reckoned with what that would mean, sort of both for me personally, ethically, but also for the book. Like I wanted to make sure it was worth it to do all of this. And yeah, I really struggle with it a lot. I think that ambivalence is like, as I'm sure you've thought too, it's just like such a hard thing to combat because like it's really hard to make people care about something when they don't or when they don't want to. And I think that's like a lot of activism, a lot of sort of people trying to do good things in the world. It's just trying to get people to sort of like care when they care in the abstract. Of course, like we all like no very few people I should say like believe in animal torture. Like that's not really, no one is going to sign up and say, yeah, I think that's good. But on the same by the same token, we have a society that really does not take animal welfare all that seriously. And so it's one of these kind of like lies we tell ourselves over and over again that this is all okay. And I think that the focus on welfare that I noticed at a lot of these festivals and at the frog jumping contest is this frog jumping contest. It's very this very quirky event where they sort of like stomp and clap and lunge behind frogs and try to make them jump as far as they can. That event had a big like frog welfare code kind of like plastered on the wall where anyone could see. And they like had a frog spa where the frogs could rest in between rounds, and they played music and had like, fresh cockroaches for them to eat. And they really talked about this as if this was
This is the greatest thing about your well, not maybe not the greatest, but there's so much great about this.
Yeah,
These
wild.
contradictions, and you paint it's such thick description, right? And that's what I love about the book. It's like this is so patently absurd that is fantastic, right? We're traumatizing these frogs and then taking them to the spa afterwards. Like marriage, you traumatize your partner and then you buy them a gift certificate to the spa, right? But isn't this, I mean, but again, its dissonance is so hard on psychologically. We just are not wired for it. I mean, did you feel like, well, after finishing this book, did you need to just take a break, like from feeling and thinking? Because this is a lot of trauma and dissonance for one person.
It is, but I felt really committed to the message of the book, which I think is, there's lots of messages to the book, but one that I came back to again and again, especially when in periods of sort of feeling down about what I had seen or what sort of the weight of what I was asking for, which is ultimately like changing in a lot of these festivals and a lot of these communities. But what I would tell myself and think about is that studying these festivals and writing about these festivals is an entryway to think about animals. It's not like most people who read my book aren't going to go to all of these festivals. It's not like a travel book sort of suggesting that you do that. And it's not even sort of like a call to action in a literal sense. Like I'm not saying, all right, now let's go picket this. Like it's not literally about these festivals, even though it is literally about these festivals. I think what I wanted in the book was to use these festivals as entryways, as thought experiments, as sort of like, okay, if you reacted so poorly to the rattlesnake roundup chapter, like how is that different than eating lobster? How is that different than eating a cow or a chicken? Like sort of really kind of thinking through those things. And every reader might not, some readers might not do that, follow those thought exercises. But for me, these festivals are interesting because of what they normalize about animals. So they're over and over again teaching kids, families, attendees, visitors, tourists that whatever is sort of happening is totally fine, totally good, and that these animals don't matter. Like that's the core lesson being taught over and over again. And I think that lesson is really interesting and dangerous and sort of at the root of a lot of how we treat animals. So I guess like whenever I was feeling down about what I had seen, I tried to think about the bigger picture, that like it's not about the, you know, a couple hundred snakes I saw get slaughtered. It's about the family that I saw where the mom leaned down to the kid when the kid was said, "Oh, mom, look, a snake." And the mom said, "That's right. The snake is so dangerous. Don't get too close." And like we're teaching that to kids. We're teaching them to be afraid, to say this killing of these snakes is self-evident. This is what has to happen because they are snakes and snakes are bad. And therefore we kill snakes. It's not like the kids are like, "Wow, look, cool, a snake." You know, like it's what we teach them. And I think these festivals are really good examples of that.
You say in the end of the book, you conclude the book with a chapter on the Scopes monkey trial, and you say the differentiation between humans and animals is part of what allows us to use animals without guilt. I was wondering though, isn't the differentiation also what allows us to have guilt about it, right? Because isn't that part of what makes us human, in addition to being storied, right? We're not in the eternal now. We can look back and look forward and orient ourselves in the present, but isn't also is not odd, right? I mean, most animals can't think, well, we could really build a different kind of dam here. We could do this, or we could be vegan. I'm a lion, but I could be vegan or whatever, you know. But what isn't our distinction? What also allows us to give ourselves a greater sense of responsibility in relationship to these creatures.
Absolutely. And I think that's like what I hope the book ends with, is basically saying that we humans, we like to think we're different than animals. We think we're better, we're smarter, we have language, we have ration, we have, you know, we have thought, we have stories. Like, there's tons of things we could say that makes us different than non-human animals. But like exactly what you said, I think flipping that from sort of like an ego boost to a responsibility, what that means is that, okay, so we have all these things. We have story, we have choice, we have thought, we have like a grocery store full of food, only one aisle of which is meat. Like how, when we're given all of these options, and we have sort of rational brains that can think through, you know, we can decide how to treat animals, how to engage with animals, how to use them in our own lives. You know, I think our humanity sort of demands that we do better. Otherwise, I think we actually are operating as animals if we're just sort of blind predators, just getting the next calorie. You know, that's an animal thing. That's not a human thing. And so I end, you know, with that exact sort of switch of perspective, I think, of saying, I think the very best of us kind of demands that we treat animals differently.
You know, I love that quote again, that we tell ourselves stories in order to live. You've told a fascinating story in this book. I love the book, Forget the Camel,
Thank
The
you.
Madcap World of Animal Festivals and What They Say About Being Human. Thank you for writing the book, and thank you for spending some time talking with me about it.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. It's always fun to talk about this book and these ideas. And I'm grateful to you for being such a thoughtful conversation partner.